started in 2004, born out of necessity. My business partner and I, we were working in another company. He moved to our current service area and there was no service. And he gave me a call and said, would you like to configure a router? I said, well, sure. Haven't done that before, but let's give it a try. That was in 2004, so we were literally two guys in a garage in different states. He was in Arizona, where we are now. I was in North Dakota at the time. Our first access point was an Omni, strapped to a horse fence, had a single T1. The single T1 grew into 2, 2 grew into 4, into 8, fractional DS3, 100 meg Ethernet, then to 1 gig Ethernet, and now we're up to 10 gig Ethernet pipes. We're still in the North Phoenix, North Scottsdale area, small communities in that area, Cave Creek, Carefree, Rio Verde. We have 4 plans, 7 and 1, 7 down, 1 up. We have very few customers on that right now. 25.5, that's fairly common. 4010 is where we have probably over half, and our 6010 is fairly new, but we get people that call in and they want as fast as it can get. They're not really interested in what they can or can't do with it. They just want it to go as fast as they can. All of our point-to-multipoints has always been Cambium. We run mostly 450 gear. We've got MP. Routers are MikroTik. We started with MikroTik shortly after the single T1. We had a T1 based router that didn't do any of the things that MikroTik allows us to do as far as firewalling and queuing. Backhauls have been all over the board. Currently we're on Cambium, Ubiquiti, AF24s, AF11s, and some of the 11 gigahertz Mimosa gear. We're getting more fiber in the network all the time. It started when we first put fiber in. We had it on one side of the network. Our network, we're lucky it happens to converge on a data center. So we've got fiber going out each side of the data center, to the east side of our network, to the west side of our network. We are now starting to look at what it will take for us to put fiber essentially every other pop. Early on, we started with Cacti and Nagios for just monitoring what usage looked like, and Nagios for letting us know when things were down. My slides are popping all over the place here, hold on. We also have a homegrown CPE page that is just a combination of information that would come off of the SM web interface as well as the AP interface. We went to that when we outsourced tech support, which our tier 1 tech support is outsourced. So that CPE page was born of that. Before Sonar was billing, we were QuickBooks. QuickBooks billed, it did what it had to do, but it did not integrate with anything. And it got to the point where QuickBooks was taking up a lot of time just to enter new credit cards. There was nothing that we could do with QuickBooks to help with our installation process. And at that point, it was becoming obvious that if we hired another installer, the way our processes were set up, we were going to need another person in the back office. So we found Sonar that helped with that dramatically. The thought of getting an install done by an installer without having so much back office support has been really good. Where are we at here? Traffic shaping, okay. So the way we do that in Sonar, customers entered as a lead. That happens with a sales call. May or may not schedule an install at the same time. When they call back, schedule an install. We assign the service. The service is the package plan, so 771, 25.5, 4010, whichever of those may be. When we do the install, when the installer shows up to do that, they assign the CPE to the customer. That's an important step in there. All of these are, if you think about what has to happen before certain things can happen, in this case, the inventory has to be assigned because the MikroTik router, once that equipment comes up, it does a DHCP request. The DHCP request fires off a script within that MikroTik router, which pushes that information over into Sonar and looks for that inventory item to assign that address to. So those things have to be done in a certain order. Once that's done, the installation is marked as completed in Sonar. We capture the billing and credit card number in Sonar. Then the Preseem-Sonar integration comes into place automatically. That service that was assigned in Sonar, it is now talking to Preseem. Preseem goes ahead and shapes that package. And we also use the AP shaping that Garrett was talking about. Both Preseem and Sonar gave us additional troubleshooting, or maybe more accurately, preemptive work that we could do on the network. So every day we go in and we look at the sector latency over time. That's the one that Garrett showed, shows all of your APs, and you can see what's going on over a time period. We also have problematic APs, like I'm sure everybody does. We look at those every morning to see what it looks like. From there, we drill down and we look at certain subscribers to find out if it's a new issue with congestion on the AP. What we find quite often is we have a handful of users that have issues within the home on their own network that still shows up under round trip latency, and we just get to know where those are at. The other thing that was very helpful in Sonar is the integration of mapping. So we would know, you'd have a feel for where your calls were coming in off of APs. What was really nice with Sonar is, sure, we knew the APs were there, but when we were able to click and say, show me this AP and show me where the trouble tickets are, suddenly there would be hotspots of tickets. And quite often, more often than not, we find that it's some sort of external interference, whether that could be external video at one customer that might affect a group of customers, other providers, whatever it is. That was a great way to start showing things. We have a call center for Tier 1. They have access to Sonar. They've been really good with figuring out how to get in and look around at things. We also give them that CPE page that I'd mentioned earlier. One thing they didn't have before, again with QuickBooks, like I said, there was no integration. They can find out if a customer is active or suspended. There's a few other things in Sonar that we haven't pushed to them yet that we use. So we use it extensively. Once something happens where Tier 1 escalates that up and we look at it internally, then we start using all of those things together. Sonar Preseem, CPE page. We look at the latency a lot. We look to see what the latency not only for the customer but for the access point, and that's where that little open Preseem button that Simon showed, you know, it's one of those little things, but you click the button there and you get this really good look at what that site looks like. So if you were having a backhaul issue, and right beside that is the AP, so you can see if it's an AP issue, and right beside that is the graph for that single customer. So that has been a very, very good tool for helping to find where the problem lies. So Preseem and Sonar, what it has really allowed us to do is scale. I'd mentioned where we were looking, if we brought on an additional installer, our processes were set up such that it was going to actually take another person in the back office. That clearly doesn't scale. So this allowed us to get, a big part was just credit cards, that we're not having to mess with that. The way the billing works, that all worked really well. And it also gave us a lot better view into the network, what was going on. So you would have that gut feel like this might not be working so well based on tickets and phone calls, but this allowed us to look in and really zero in on the latency. As Garrett said, latency is a great indicator of how well things are working. If we have access points that are green and have good latency all the way across, we know we're not getting phone calls on that. And if we do get phone calls on that and everything shows green, latency looks good, we go to that button, the customer button that pops up and shows the site, the AP, and the customer, and pretty much without exception, we can see that if there's a latency issue, it's going to be just that customer. And I'd mentioned the trouble tickets, how we can see certain areas that are hot spots, and the whole scaling issue, that's just the process optimization. So we look at things and we say, where and what is slowing us down? Sometimes that might be throughput for backhauls. Sometimes that might be we need more APs. Sometimes we might need more people. But whatever it is, we've looked at how do we optimize things, find the bottlenecks, and work through them. And without exception, I think every time we've found something and looked at it, we could have always done it earlier and it would have been easier. So literally each day is easier than the next when it comes to doing these things. So we didn't wait too long. Once we found Sonar, we had some other issues going on, so where we had to put it in very quickly. But at that point, it was already where we could have used it a year earlier. And the same is true with Preseem. The latency that gives us the information, but the package shaping, Caudal does a great job. When we first put Caudal in, inadvertently left a 1 gig cap, and it happened to be in an area where we were running about 1.5 gigs. Normally that would have resulted in just a flood of phone calls, but it ran for 3 hours before I noticed it and called up and said, hey, we're only getting 1 gig, and we removed that cap. But it did such a good job on that traffic that nobody called in. Now I'm sure there was some people that were thinking things weren't quite right, but to actually drop our throughput by 30 to 40% and not receive any calls, that was a really good mistake to have a feel for what Caudal could actually do for us.